So I'll do some quick introductions, and then I'll talk about the format of this talk. So I'm Andrea Corey. I'm currently VP of Engineering at FreshBooks. I've been there about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was at scale-ups and startups. So that includes Eloqua. I was there for 12 to 14 years, depending on how you count the first part and then the acquisition part with Oracle. And there we built marketing automation, really pioneered that in the early to mid 2000s. And again, sold that to Oracle at the end. Then I was at Nudge for almost 5 years. And sadly, that one didn't work out, so we shut that down in January of 2020, and then I found myself at FreshBooks after that. I have a degree in applied science, engineering physics, and mechanical engineering at Queen's. So I didn't really come through the software stack or coding or whatever. I did a bit of that as part of my degree, but really kind of learned it in a few early jobs and along the way, and learned many trial and error things through the course of mostly Eloqua, scaling up, building SaaS in the early 2000s. A lot of fun, and yeah. So I'll introduce Steve Woods. He's, I just got to mention, so there's two Steve Woods. I'm not sure if everybody is aware of that. There's another Steve Woods that I've known for 25 years and worked with at both Eloqua and Nudge. And so it's really exciting to
taller.
get, he's a little, it's fine. Less hair, taller, it's all good. So it's really exciting when I saw this, because I was like, I'm going to meet the other Steve Woods finally. It's great. But Steve has a great career that I'll explain here. So he joined Inovia as a partner in CTO in August 2021. He's worked in software development, research, technical leadership for more than 30 years. As co-founder of 3 software services companies based in the USA, so that's Quack.com, Kinetos, and NeoEdge Networks, he built strong, high-performing teams of product and technical experts based in both the Silicon Valley area and, of course, the Waterloo-Toronto tech corridor. So one of these companies, Quack.com, pioneered the world's first interactive voice assistant and was acquired by Netscape America Online in 2000. So Steve joined Google in 2008 to return home to Canada and build a world-class engineering and product capability with a uniquely Canadian culture of quality, commitment, and innovation. That's really interesting to me personally, because we do things a bit differently here, right?
So.
Yeah. So he led the growth and leadership development of Google Canada product and engineering teams from 20 to over 1,300 across a range of products between 2008 and 2021. So now at Inovia, he brings these years of entrepreneurial and engineering experience, passion for working with innovators, founders, and his extensive network to their portfolio companies. He also plays an important role in evaluating deal flow from a product, technology, and talent perspective. And he's long time been an independent investor, advisor, board member to startups, innovation networks, and nonprofits in both Canada and the USA. So since joining, he has led investments in Signal1.ai, Toronto-based transformative application of AI in improving healthcare outcomes, and Route This, a Waterloo-based company supporting service providers, improving home networking experiences. Okay, that's a lot. That's a lot. You've done amazing things. So he holds a Bachelor of Science from Comp Sci at University of Saskatchewan. I'm actually from the prairies too. I grew up in Winnipeg.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And a master's and PhD in computer science and mathematics from Waterloo. So among the numerous awards he's also received the prestigious J.W. Graham Medal in Computing and Innovation from the University of Waterloo in 2010. And he was recognized with a Distinguished Lifetime Achievement Award from the University of Saskatchewan in 2021. So this is fantastic. I'm really looking forward to this chat. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to start off with a few questions that that have been prepared in advance. And if everyone can start to think through questions they might have for Steve, given his experience, both at Google and a long time builder of teams, technology, people, leadership, as well as his new role at Inovia in the VC space. So let's get started. Okay, you've had an outstanding career, and this is a bio, but I'm sure it doesn't quite cover it all. So can we talk a little bit more about your path, starting as a founder, then through your time at Google, which would have been a different kind of path, and then thirdly, the transition to VC and sort of why you chose this route and what you're hoping to accomplish next in your current role?
Well, it's nice meeting you here, and thank you for having me here. I think that all summarizes I'm very old, the way you describe it. But yeah, I actually came from a small town in the prairies where I had a really interesting childhood. And part of it, I guess, is you have a chance to do a lot of things. Yeah. And part of that was sports. And so I was very active in sports and leading in sports, participating in lots of things. Not just sports, but I was writing software when I was very young too. But and that gave me a very probably complementary perspective to some of you, where I started to see teams as like you might see a sports team. Different roles, different things contributing to what is an overall team success as opposed to individual success. And so, I went off like we all do and do jobs and work and write software and other things. But I think what I learned over the years is I really enjoyed the team part of everything around, just like I did with sports, around building things and collaborating and coming together to have crazy things come together. So I realized that was what I liked. And I started putting teams together. And then when you're in a team, if you're really, especially if you're trying to be the leader of it, you start saying, well, what is my role? What can I contribute? Mm-hmm. And you start realizing, well, I can get someone else who's better at me than that and this, and eventually everything turns out. But I realized that was my passion, was being able to be a builder of teams and an enabler and a supporter of others, with the odd idea thrown in. And so that led me down through the startups, because that sounds like a startup founder quite a bit, and then all the pain, insert pain, and I've had the pain, yes. the challenges and successes, but then bad outcomes as well as good. I had a win, a loss, and a tie in my startup life. So
hey, that's pretty good average.
So 500 in sport terms, right? But you only really need one win, it turns out. And so, but from that's what I learned, and literally that was how I ended up at Google. Was I was recruited by some of the early people there and said, well, we're not a large tech company, and it was in some ways really true. I'd spent some time with my company being acquired by, an Oracle-like entity, and I hated it intensely. And so I was a vice president there for a while, and I really realized that was not the culture to be an empowering team builder. So I did my time like one does, and then left. And but at Google, there was a time, and I think there's other people here from Google today, so nothing negative to say about that company. It's amazing to me. It was a place where I was given that empowerment to build teams. And I was told I would be, and without all that Sand Hill Road pain.
Yes.
And that was true, and that's why I went there. So I was recruited into Google by Googlers, and I was recruited out of Google by Googlers. To leave, because they said, look, that's over now, so let's go do something else and build more teams. Yeah. And really, that is my role at Inovia, is to help support others. A lot more indirect, which is hard, but to do that and to invest in Canadian tech and Canadians in tech generally.
Okay, amazing. Yeah. That's super interesting because, back in the, early days of my career, early 2000s, the VC scene in Toronto and Canada was very small, if existing at all. So I love that you're kind of focusing on that ecosystem.
Yeah, my experiences when I was starting my companies originally started in 98, 9. This is a long time ago. I wasn't here, I was in the United States.
Yeah.
But I tried to raise money in the Valley and was horribly unsuccessful. Met some great people, relationships that remain to this day, but they didn't give me any money. So I came back here to raise money and eventually did pretty quickly, and then went back.
Okay.
So yeah, but I didn't have helpful venture capitalists, so I'm not a venture capitalist fan. Yeah.
Got it.
Except for us. We're great.
Okay, so let's change the topic a little bit. You're known for your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially some great things you were able to accomplish at Google. Can you share how you've achieved some of your successes in this domain, the value that it's brought to the organizations you've been a part of?
Yeah, it's a very complicated question, and I enjoy the question. Like all great startups, good startups succeed after failure, I think, and experience. So I didn't understand it for years and years of independent team building. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say I didn't value it, because you have to understand something to not value it. I didn't understand what it meant to build healthy teams you learn. And when I came to Google, Like one of the reasons I came to Google is I could cheat, and I see Tony's back there, he's busy cheating, I'm sure too, he came from Facebook. But like, meaning you take advantage of the tools you have to build the teams you can, right? And at Google you have certain tools. Startups have others. I always tell startup people, you have passion and an idea and this exciting vision, and that's a tool, you know, and it's true too.
Yeah.
But it was true what I had too, which is money, lots of it. And also recruiters, lots of them, right? And access to everyone who was willing to come work for us. And so, and I had lots of projects too, whereas a lot of startups have 1 or 2 or 3. I had dozens intentionally, right? So I could help manage careers, and this is all very intentional, but again, back to diversity. I mean, these are the things that I had. And so I failed. Not at the project necessarily, not at the team building, but at the diversity, a lot. Like not intentionally. In fact, intentionally I tried, but failed. Meaning, like our recruiting process and systems might say they were built to help build the first teams, but biased against it.
Yeah.
Just totally not by, you know, certainly you could argue by design, just bad design, right? And so, you know, example, well, you know all of it. I mean, I don't want to belabor it, but like, you know, the funnels are wrong, the outreach is wrong, the relationships are wrong, you're at the wrong location at the wrong time to make the relationships you need to convince people that you can build diverse teams and you can trust us and establish trust and relationships and all the rest of it. So, you know, we had meetings and togetherness and why are we failing? And with, you know, I'm going to talk about male-female diversity here, not because it's the only one, but because it's at least addressable. And so it was like, what are we doing wrong? Yeah. And the reality was, we said, okay, look, to do anything, we actually have the tools. So why are we crying? We have money. We have influence, right or wrong, right? We have angry vice presidents and senior vice presidents and whatever else in California, but who really can't be running around saying they're not helping us, right? So we could use, let's just say, encouragement/shame. My boss is somebody named Jen. She's very enthusiastic on this topic. And you know, you can't fire Jen at Google because she owns too much of Google, so she's quite helpful. And so like we took these things and said, okay, look, we need to address it. That means change the funnel, put money into universities to help them address their intake process. You know, insert example, like, okay, great, like I have a lot of math degrees, but like I like math good. You know, you don't need it for computer science, you need science and things like you, but like it's a good signal. So Waterloo, University of Waterloo as an example, where we were building engineering teams in Waterloo, largely Toronto too, and Montreal, but largely Waterloo. We're like 7 blocks from the University of Waterloo. We're sort of downstream from their graduates, and we love interns. So their output to us was 15-17% female. So that's bad. Yeah. So what happened? Sorry for the longness here.
No, this is a topic near to me.
Yeah, me too, right? So I would, and this is, you know, you can argue this is bad, but I would but I was the opening speaker to the Women in Google conference every year in Canada, which is a little embarrassing, but I don't mean it that way. But I mean, you know, I'm a big believer that the women should be doing the leading. But they come to me and say, look, we want you to have an opening talk. And I'm like, okay, and I would do it year after year. And finally they came and said, okay, we'd like you to do it. And I just said no. In my office one night, 7 o'clock at night at Google, I'm working, and I just wouldn't even, you didn't reply to our email, are you going to do it? I'm like, I'm not going to do it. And I was like, there was no, like, you are doing it, there's no debate, you have to do it. I'm like, well, I suck. Like, my numbers are 13.5% male, female, and I've hired everybody, so who's he going to blame? Like, it's my fault. And they're like, well, say that. I'm like, well, this is sort of fair, right? It's true, right? So I did, and HR was not impressed, so I put up a chart. Here's what we've done. We've hired 375 people, and I have 13.5% male, female, so failure. And good news, we're gonna get to 50-50. We have a plan. We just have to be here 88 more years. And there's my projected curve. We're good, right? We just have to all hang on. But no, literally what I said, and you know, because if you're gonna do this, do it. At Google, you have OKRs, very specific OKRs that have a way of multiplying against your bonus. Yeah, it's really funny math. And so I put that as my number 1 OKR, that I would, you know, double the intake for male, female engineers, and then not right away, but eventually leaders. And so, you know, fast forward, I got a 0 in the first year, 0 in the second year. But eventually we didn't get zeros. And you know, my boss, who's a wonderful person, maybe was more like anyone is like, well, how are we doing with our delivery? How are we doing with our product metrics, blah, blah. But if you write it as your first OKR, it's going to come up in your management meeting. And so it became a point of conversation, a point of what are we doing, what are the action items, blah. And so eventually, we were pretty influential, I think, and not just locally, but globally, in changing the way Google looked at diversity in universities, at the way some universities, like Waterloo, in partnership with people there of like mind, switched to interviews as part of their intake process instead of just math scores as a maximum only metric. So we started getting a higher diversity of people in lots of diverse metrics, because as we all know, if you start excluding concert pianists, you're probably making a mistake just because they're not spending all their time at home doing math, right? So at any rate, it took a long time is the answer, with a lot of partners, a lot of great support from a company that really does believe in this. It believes in allyship and it lives it. It doesn't always succeed.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the ironies is I did leave in 2021, and one of my long-term coworkers was still with me is here, and he was still back at Google, and I think I was so proud. They told me in the year I was gone, I think that Google had hired in Canada 20 senior female engineering leads, which at the time, at a certain degree of seniority, which would have been impossible to imagine.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that's the long answer. The short answer is it took a long time. And as for team success, there's a bunch of metrics. I'll just throw a couple quick. And you'll have more, I had to do a talk to a women in computing event in Canada once. It was very terrifying, 400 women in a room. Again, I don't talk at women. It's not a thing I do, right? But I will talk with women. And so I brought out a bunch of metrics because engineers like metrics. And then I started talking about STEM education and grade 7 abandonment. But they didn't like the outcome because Google did a big, huge kind of study with math. And the main contributing factor to young women living computer science, young ladies living computer science, was their mothers. And that was a difficult message to deliver.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and I agree. And that's you have to go back behind the metrics. But the reason, there's reasons, not just reason, but there are reasons, is that the culture sucks and their mothers know it and they don't want their young daughters to go into it. But at the end of the day, the message is being delivered by their mother, not their teacher. And so, the point of that, of course, is the responsibility of the industry is to do better and communicate it. But there's sort of a path to that, for example, in this case, and that is communicating outcomes instead of the mechanism. So, we're going to solve cancer. We're going to have better healthcare outcomes. I invested in Signal One recently. Our company did, but with a partner friend of mine, who I love, Tomi Putinen, it saves lives. That's, you want to pitch? That's what we do. Last year, they saved 27 people's lives. It's a tough metric. You want to convince young women to stay in computer science? Tell them you can save lives, solve cancer, improve radiological diagnosis, whatever. Yeah. But anyway, I'm excited.
No, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Part of what makes applied science so interesting is that you're taking science and you're applying it to solving problems, right? And that tends to gravitate, a certain type of person who's not about just the tech wizardry, but the problem. What's the problem space? How can we make that better? So I've had great success, I would say, in selling that kind of, situation where we're going to solve this problem. We're going to use technology to solve this problem and make the world a better place, right? So,
I think that is a wonderful way to go for everyone.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, teams. So you talked a bit about teams, but let's broaden that a bit. What are your secrets, or how do you think about building strong technology teams?
Yeah, it's funny because we talk about sports teams, that's fine, it's all great until you're more than 20 people, right? You're 30 people. I'm not an NFL player, so 60 or something, but at any rate, it doesn't scale quite. Yeah. So I'm a big believer in the things that you might imagine, like trust, empowerment, communication, and openness. So the challenge as you get bigger is how do you maintain those structures? I think I did pretty well with my own companies, with my own team members, up until a couple of hundred, with very, frank, confidential closed-door sessions. Google historically did that very, very well, where you were able to ask the founders virtually any question and get a horrifically direct answer, not to their benefit, quite honestly, all the time, but at least open. And we tried to maintain that for a long time. In my startups, it was sort of easy because we never really got much beyond 150. So it was that frank openness, empowerment, hire great people, put them in charge of the problem, not the don't give them direction, etc. I mean, I don't want to elide that, but I'm talking to a group of professionals. It's just, for me, that's that. I know there are people quite vocal online who take a completely diametric different approach to this, which is, no, I should be able to run the entire company myself and just tell everybody what to do, it'll be great. I think that's nonsense. It's just me. I don't believe that's even a thing, but whatever. I also believe in diverse ways of doing things, so whatever. But it's not me. So some of you may know who's very vocal about that around here. But so at any rate, like, find the people, assemble them, get them behind the same message, and then just go forward and be open to communicating. But beyond that, how do you scale those kinds of processes and things like that? I'm going to pick on someone here in the room. So Corey Jeffrey is in the room here. He's the vice president of technology at Inovia. And also, he was the chief of staff for me at Google. And then before that, he ran his incubator. So, and was also in charge of developer relations for Google. But like, I guess what I'm saying is, like, he is an expert in technology operations processes, people, delivery, et cetera. And so how do you pull that together and make it scale? You have to find a way to make trust scale. That's hard, right? So, we have an idea, theory, we're not psychologists, around transitive trust, which basically makes everybody responsible for doing the same thing all the way through the tree and, minimizing the depth, et cetera. This worked, I think, very well for a long time. I think if you have missions that people believe in, I think if you have passion around the things like you were describing about solving a thing, making an outcome, I think you can build momentum around it. And if you demonstrate and live the trust, not just on the project, not just on the challenges, but on careers, right? And I know how hard this is in a startup. I'm not kidding, like, I do. At Google, though, see, cheat, large company thing, right? If you have a lot of projects and a lot of opportunities, if you're very intentional and willing to put the time into understanding who's great, who's having challenges, who can do better, who wants to learn, who's passionate about what, even if they're on Project X, you can really help them all by having an intentional process to helping them manage their career through the company. Because no one else will. HR won't, it's not their job. And no one's job. It should be every manager's job. And I tried very hard to make it every manager's job to help their people not stay on their team, but find the team where they'd be more successful over time. And I'm gonna add one more thing to this. So I think we learned, myself and my peers learned from other very, very smart female engineering leads with very strong opinions and experiential perspective on the industry that we didn't have, that allyship is great, but being a champion is best. And so we learned how to be champions, not mentors, but to say, I will help you when a position comes up, find an opportunity that you should get because you deserve it. And often those people find their way through careers at larger companies much better if someone is just looking out for them, because nobody can see the visibility. So I think that combination of things, I think, worked pretty well for a long time.
Yeah, that's a hugely important point, the champion mindset. To really bring people up. And people, not just women, people of other alternative or underrepresented backgrounds.
I was just, at Google, there was a huge counter movement to the way performance reviews were done for a long time. And I mean, it's enormously expensive.
Yeah.
Like, unbelievably, agonizingly, ridiculously expensive. But there's a reason, is that you were sharing visibility into lots of people, to a lot of other people, and not managers. Not only managers, but mostly peers and individual technical leaders, individual contributor leaders would have huge say at Google into your performance review for an individual contributor. So, in fact, managers were basically largely ignored for a long, long time.
I've read articles about this.
Yeah, it's totally true. And over time, that sort of eroded. And some things don't scale perfect, and the cost is so high. But, right, people see someone, you see it in their performance review all the time. Like, well, they did great, but this project's really not that fantastic, so, we really can't get them to that level score that they need to get promoted, so whatever. And you're like, no, not whatever.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. You mean we have somebody who has higher potential than we're allowing them? Like, I mean, I would see that as a personal failure.
Yeah, do something about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome. So now let's pivot a little bit, although it's really related to the same thing. How do you drive productivity through teams? And I'm personally interested in, the OKR aspect and how related are those to you?
Yeah, I think this is a really great question. I think productivity at Google is a very challenging question. Tony, I see over here from Google, he's much probably more attuned to that than me. I think the reason I'm wobbly, and I'll come back to it a bit, is at Google, not so much in all areas, the concept of productivity is very different.
Okay.
In cloud or something where you have very specific third-party enterprise customers and you're selling software and they're buying it or they're not buying it or more or less, it's pretty good to measure. They use that money metric a lot. In a lot of other projects at Google, the metrics are very amorphous. Like one of my projects that I led a bunch of it, both directly and then indirectly for a long time, was Gmail. And so pick a metric. How's your user engagement? Well, pretty good. We got 2.5 billion daily users. People are pretty happy with that. They seem happy mostly. They're a little confused about the conversation view maybe, but oh well. And you wouldn't want to use money as a metric. And so productivity there, I think, became a real point of contention. It depended which organization the team was in. And it caused all kinds of confusion, performance, review, angst. Disagreements, fighting. That particular project is now part of a larger entity, which is inside cloud. I imagine it's much more specific, tied to long-term engagement on customers and metrics, things like that. Okay, Google's foray into hardware. What's the metric?
Yeah.
So in those companies, I think is very hard to say, because at Google the problem was making an impact is very hard. Really, making any meaningful impact is virtually. One of the greatest technical achievements teams that I had, I always had the pleasure of working with was probably Stadia. I mean, the technical achievement to make Stadia work such that a professional gamer couldn't tell the difference is amazing, and I was sure we could never do it. I mean, as a financial outcome, probably bad. Yeah. And as an entity that was ever going to make Google any meaningful money against its OKRs, but that was never its point.
Okay.
So hard to be a big company for that. And so that's one of the reasons they revert to launches, in my opinion, right?
Okay. That's great discussion on that. It's time to take some questions. So who's got a question? I also have one more here, if I don't see anything. Oh, we have one?
Way at the back.
It's hard for me to see with these stage lights.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. So you've been doing this a long time, Steve, 30 plus years. Put you on the spot. What is different about building highly effective technical teams today than in the past? But what's different that's important to know, if anything?
I mean, I hate coming back to this how old I am theme, but yeah. So I think it's a thing. Okay, so let me try it. All right. The thing that is amazing to me is how much an individual or small team can accomplish given the levers of the technology stacks that are in front of all of you today and of the companies we're investing in. I think it's sometimes hard as a product. I'm more of a product team person now than a technologist. I once was a technologist, but is that it's sometimes hard to even predict what's possible from a disruption point of view given an assembly of 3 really great tool sets. Like whether it's scalable or sustainable, whatever, that's another thing. But I think that's mesmerizing. And I think sometimes you see a traditional company now, and they still exist amazingly, but and you see what they're doing on a technology basis for their product stack or something, and you're like, oh my God, that's completely wrong. And that's really only 5 or 6 years old, right? And you're thinking, oh my God, that's gonna slow them down so much, maybe they're not investable now because someone's going to get ahead of them, if this makes any sense. You can pick the easy examples of something like TBD successful, but Cohere or something like that is an example of integrate billions of pieces of information and be able to create an API that disrupts an entire industry, and there's 3 people in a high school class do it. I think that changes the way you think of a team. An example of this at Google, a lot of our senior engineers would come to me and they're like, I need to see more kids. And you're like, oh, what do you mean? They're like, no, really. We need to see how these young people in school, in high school, they all see themselves, how are they doing this? Like, what are they doing? Like, we're inward looking too much, using our own tools, our own platforms, et cetera. And like, you're like, how are they making this work? We need to talk to them more. So I guess that was sort of the net thing, is trying to understand how you build a team in that is really, really challenging. So I'd boil this to one thing. I've always boiled it to one thing, and now it's even more true. Because the definition of what it is has changed over the years. Who or what is a technical driver? So it's my own thing, and it's probably not well defined because I'm not writing a book. But like, a technical driver for me is somebody who's assigned a piece of work, or asked to do a piece of work, or has said we need to do this piece of work, whichever culture you're in, and has done that, and has thought, okay, the things around it are broken or not right, or I don't understand, and starts asking questions, and talks to the people, finds the people in charge, and says, why are we doing it this way? Asks the question, suggests there's a new solution, and continues this for a while. And you find that person, and you just keep allowing them more empowerment, authority, opportunity, whatever the culture again, to just do more. And HR people often get very fritzy about this kind of thing, because you're like, you're going to work these people to death. Or, I may have heard that occasionally. And you're like, no, that's not what we're doing. We're just giving them that latitude, this leadership opportunity to empower drivers who know what they're doing. Because I'm too old to know what I'm doing, so you should probably find some people who are. So that's my view. And I guess to punchline to that, that's what has scared me as an old dude about distributed teams. Like, okay, yes, you can do lots of things different ways, I guess. But can you still find technical drivers? For real? If you can, great. If you're not, I'd worry about it.
Okay.
Coming.
Sorry. Hey, thanks. So the part of your presentation that really stuck with me, and it was all great, was when you were talking about performance reviews at Google and how you would read performance reviews where it says, so this person did a great job, but the project isn't that important, and so no promotion. And that is something that I've seen happen to me. I have done it to other people. And part of it is because in several organizations that I've worked at one point, they have increased the amount that they wanted to bias impact in performance reviews as opposed to the quality of work. And I wonder, how do we, as the technical leaders, figure out how to talk to our HR counterparts so that this doesn't happen? Because I tend to agree with you that if you're telling people, yeah, you did great work, but your project isn't important to us, that is wasted potential. And I think a lot of those people tend to leave at the end. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts as to how we can try to make it better.
Yeah, I mean, I like that last comment. I'll come backwards to the HR part of it. Like, I tell them to leave, to be honest. Like, I said, if I can't get you a project you're going to be passionate about and love, then why are you working here? I would usually come back with an example of where you might have that, but not always, to be honest. And so I haven't had the world's best possible relationships with human resources over the years. I'm not sure I have the perfect example. I've largely been at war with tech HR for my life. Not some, at least one is still a really great personal friend of mine. I think it is very hard, especially in organizations where tech and product people are extremely well paid, to keep talking to cross-functional partners where they aren't maybe as paid as generously, and talk about how critically important it is that this person be put on a path towards, I'm picking promotion as an example, and I don't think it's the outcome you necessarily want. I want impact, and I want recognition, and whatever, but like promotion's often the checkmark box, right? The gold star that people often see as associated with that. I think that's sometimes really hard, and they're like, well, we just want people to be happy long term, and I'm like, I don't think that's what we want. I don't think that's true. I think we want people to be, Larry Page's term, like, uncomfortably excited, I think is sort of true. People do great things when they're uncomfortably excited. Let's just go with excited. I don't think you need to be uncomfortable or unsafe, right? Like,
Yeah.
And so I think it is a real challenge. I really do. I'm not sure I have the right answer. I really liked peers, feedback on peers when there's a sense of trust at the table. Like, it's not mean, right? It's not. It's quite helpful. I think there's a point where blatant honesty is sort of not perfect, but I think that visibility across teams, particularly, Like at Google, the thing that was really great is if you were a really high-performing 6 or something, the people who are looking at your packet are 7s or 8s, and not managers, God help us. Like they're individual contributor, and if an individual contributor 8 at Google is looking at your packet and you're a 6 saying, hey, we think this person should be on a new project, you're on a new project pretty quick, right? And so, and the nice thing I felt for a long time at Google is HR was a support organization, not telling you how to do it. And so, I'm not saying it's the only way or the right way, but I was in an engineering culture where I thought the engineers were pretty proactive on people, and so it was healthy that way. So I think we avoided the impact thing. You'd see it, right? You'd see it, and we acted on it. If you didn't act on it, then you're complicit, I would think. And people are, as you know, managers are motivated to not act on it, right? Because a high-performing person doing great work for you, and you don't have a great project.
Mm-hmm. But how do you think about, impact beyond the results of, say, that project, right? There's all sorts of other factors, maturity, how they communicate, how they deal with failure.
Right, and so absolutely, and this. So this is all at Google at least, and I encourage people to do it. Obviously, I assume people do, but you sort of get your blinkered.
Yeah.
That was a lot there. Certainly, the work was like huge component of it, like the code reviews, the project launches, the specific problem solved, etc. But attitude, working with coworkers is a massive component to it, and I think this is something overlooked. Certainly, cultural contributions. Mm-hmm. And for me, cultural contributions, defined any way you want, were great. One of my favorite times at Google, there was a long time where, think of it on a 100-point scale. It wasn't, but think of it that way for simplicity. It was a 100-point scale, and basically, here's your review. You're doing great code contributions, lots of code reviews, which is a requirement of your job, all great. Oh, did nothing culturally. Like no interviews, no outreach, no STEM education programs, minus 15. So it didn't matter that you were 100 because you just went to minus 15. So now you're not promoted. In fact, maybe you went down a performance level. So now it affects your bonus. I think that's a little direct.
Yeah.
And it wasn't phrased that way necessarily. It was like you really should take advantage of your opportunity to do this. But it was also phrased as that your community obligation to your peers is also to do it. And a lot of people said, fine, I'll do interviews. And that's fine. So, that helps get at this a little bit,
Yeah. Yeah.
I also, I'm going to say something about this on diversity, if it's okay. So, at Google at least, one of the things that I worried about a lot was that women were self-selecting / being encouraged to switch to management tracks early. And, arguably, if you looked at the metrics and you had enough people, you'd think too early. So at Google, you need to get to 5 before you can be a people manager. So you have to go 3, 4, 5. So you have to be a good developer. You have to be a good contributor. Yeah. You have to get through all the things. These are good, amazing contributing people who, but I don't remember the exact metric, but 40% may be more likely to become a manager than get to a 6 IC. And you're like, at Google, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. If people want it, they should do what they want. But it seemed like they were being pushed a little. Because of good communication skills, good conflict resolution, yeah. And because Google does a horrific job at entry, at hiring people like that. And so you hire a bunch of people and then you look around, okay, great, we've hired great engineers, super. Did we happen to hire any managers? That's exactly what happened, right? And you're like, okay, this person looks like a manager. Like this person, one of the people is not a woman, but a guy I met in the right away. I'm like, oh my God, you'd be an amazing manager. Oh, please. No.
Yeah.
And then tried him out, hated it. He's like, oh, this is awful. Went back. This is a hugely successful engineering director at Google now, and probably still resents it. But so I think that's an interesting thing, right? Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's a bias. Maybe because there's so few women and they're able to negotiate a room. But it goes back to the question you asked at the very beginning about healthy teams. Yeah. Is that, okay, here's data, okay? Mixed teams, so call it 50-50, which is something we could talk about because we've built 50-50 male-female teams at Google for a while, have higher retention in the men, way higher retention in the women. Mm-hmm. It's about 3 times as easy to place a new grad, hire female engineer on that team as any other team. Mm-hmm. And if you empower the engineering lead, who is definitely a woman on this team, to make selections, this is going to be the highest performing team you have in a cluster for sure. So there you go. If you want just metric-based reason to do it, there.
It's amazing to have that volume to
You need the numbers.
get the, yeah. I mean, I tried to do, and I did, a 50-50 team at once. At one point, Eloqua, after we had been acquired by Oracle, but it was much smaller scale, right? So it was hard to really see.
And we didn't think it was even possible,
Yeah.
to your point.
No, I set a goal and I said this is going to happen, and
It's possible.
yeah,
We called it clustering. Probably we need a better word.
no, it works. It works. Okay. Oh, there's another question. Yeah.
Hi, Steve. Thank you very much for the talk. It's useful to hear your perspective. On the topic of solving the right problem, as a VC, do you have any thoughts on where the actual opportunities are and what you're seeing from that perspective?
And I'm just going to mention we have 5 minutes left, so
Okay.
it's probably the last question.
All right. Thanks, Tony. Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, like we're figuring ourselves out. Me and my Googler friend have come together to Inovia because we have a very different network to our Canadian-rooted financial friends. Like I came along working with Patrick Bichette. He used to be the CFO of Google, so he has a fairly elaborated Valley network, and going to be much more useful when he gets to leave the Twitter board this morning, because he's been sort of distracted, it seems. But I think that to your question, Tony, we see a lot of really great companies that would be also good companies running with spreadsheets, and can be really good companies if they just had a better software architecture. And I find them intensely boring. And I don't think that's why we were asked to come to Inovia. You know, I think we were supposed to provide a little bit of pizzazz to the kinds of companies we look at. I don't know if that's the right way to put it. They need to be profitable. It's critically important. Our LPs are very enthusiastic about that. But, or at least have good outcomes, I suppose. So I guess I see companies like Signal One as hugely transformative, meaningful, important, and worth putting time in. So, you know, we all have fixed time in the world. And, you know, we take a 10-year view of our investments. And we have multi-faceted funds. We have discovery, we have venture, we have growth. I'm a partner all across on each category. So we can move companies along and support them and be partners with founders and their teams on journeys that can be quite long, 20 years maybe. And so my partners always ask me, do you really want to do this for 10 years? And I think it's a great metric. And I think the answer is we don't see that many companies yet where we can, you know, characterize the set and say, okay, these are the right ones. But there are transformative companies being founded in Canada, and we don't just invest in Canada, but trying to decide what those companies we invest in outside of Canada is a little vague. I was asked by a US VC just recently, like, what is your thesis in the States? And I'm like, well, we invest in nice founders. We're Canadians. And after they stopped, it was on a panel, after they stopped laughing, they're like, that actually makes a lot of sense because we don't do that. And I'm like, yeah, we know that, right? And, you know, and as a result, I think we have a unique viewpoint. But as for categories of companies, I would say we're very interested in the really interesting segment of healthcare, generally spoken. I mean, it's an area that has a lot of strife. It's expensive. It's getting more expensive. People are being underserved. It's affecting human quality of life. And, you know, over history, we've looked at technologies that can change that. This is a transformational point for various both good and horrific reasons for healthcare. Information is available in the cloud that wasn't just a few short years ago, and is being put there at an accelerating rate with higher quality. So, you know, end-to-end healthcare is getting better. Predictiveness of different kinds of things is getting better. Diagnostics are getting wildly better. I saw a talk recently at the University of Waterloo on, actually one of our female engineering leads was giving a talk, so I went to watch her do it, from former Google. And the healthcare lab was presenting this thing which was showing data that they're using off the new Apple Watch sensors and integrated into a time series, and then they were comparing it side by side to a set of data from a $10,000 band that you'd use if you were at Stanford being watched carefully. And then they were doing predictive time series predictions off the same data set, and it's the same. Each data set is worse, but the overall predictiveness was the same. And you're like, oh my, that's interesting.
Right.
And so I think we're at this great turning point. So I'm very excited about that. I think there's lots of business challenges, right? There's entrenched players. There's perverse economic incentives in healthcare. one kind of perverse here in Canada and the UK, a different kind of perverse in the United States? Like, is it cost effective to save the child kind of questions? Like, but I think that we're going to see some great things there. So if I had to pick a sector right now, Tony, I would pick that one.
Okay. Do we have time for one more quick question? Okay, great. One more. Sorry, I dampened the.
Hi. Are we on? You opened with a remark around building both teams and product in Canada being different in the US. And Andrea, you touched on that too. I'm just interested in hearing a little more on that.
You mean in the differences about what regions mean now, or?
Well, you talked about the difference in building teams in Canada and building product in Canada versus US.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, you didn't expand on, I'm wondering where you're going with
Yeah,
that.
this is a challenge for me. I'm a hugely biased person. It's like I'm not, I am sympathetic to my biases, but I'm also aware. So I built teams in the Valley for a long time. I hired essentially exclusively Canadians. And I was asked a lot of questions about it. But I would come here, I would find Canadians, I'd recruit them, I'd move them to California. The bad articles were written about me in the Globe and Mail, bad. Like, and then when I moved here, I got them to come back, I had people buy houses in like suburban Waterloo by selling their Ferraris, which I always thought was hilarious. But like, who are still there, happily living there. But like, I think look, I'm a Canadian, it's ridiculous, right? Like, I'm from Bumpkinville, North Saskatchewan. Like, where I grew up, handshake is your bond, because otherwise my dad, who sold fuel oil, isn't going to give it to you and you're all going to freeze to death in the winter, right? And so, like, trust. We all talk about trust.
Yeah.
And so, like, I have had great experiences with Canadians in trust, very, very challenging experiences with Americans in trust. There are exceptions. So I enjoyed the Canadian culture of engineering, which I would suggest, like, practically, comes out as I'm not quitting every time something goes wrong that day, which I think is a very useful characteristic in a startup. And, but you earn that. Yeah. And I believe in that. So I found the Valley incompatible long-term to my personal sanity, and that's why I left. And so when I came back here with Google, I intentionally and was asked to. I mean, I was recruited for a reason, which was I had a philosophy on team building, and I was empowered to bring it, and given the money, so I did. And I think it's a very healthy structure for teams, and I think that if you bring trust, you bring the applied science perspective, and we're going to accomplish something together, and you're a valued member of the team, and here's what we're hoping you can bring, and you tell us, can you bring more? And I'll do what I say as best I can, and if I can't, I'll tell you and help you find a new job. I think that's a great way to build companies. And when I'm investing, that's what I want to invest in, because I'm going to be that founder's partner for a long time.
Fantastic. Great.
So,
I agree with all that. So our time's up. Thank you very much. This is great chat.
Thank you for the question. Thank you.